like the left is militating against the advent of science. One of those areas is the area of transgenderism. The argument that is typically made by gender theorists is that gender is entirely separate from sex. You've seen the argument made that it makes no difference on average if men are stronger than women are, and that if we were to allow transgender women to compete with non-transgender women, then this would somehow not disadvantage biological women. And this seems to me absolutely ascientific, that if we're actually going to have a discussion about gender and sex, that should be based in data, which suggests that mammals are in fact binary in terms of their sex, unless you have intersex birth defects typically, or genetic defects.
I'm happy to opine on this. This only matters because today we segregate nearly all sports by gender. Otherwise, why do you even give a shit what someone identifies with? We live in a free country, and with consenting adults and people free expression of who and what they are.
Man, on adult level, I agree with you. I think it does matter what you teach
That's what
children.
I'm saying. And so there's the matrix of what you are biologically, how you express yourself, who you choose as a sexual partner. If we actually live in a free country, as we tell ourselves, people's freedom to behave in any of those ways should not concern you at all. Nor are they requiring that you behave that way. Okay?
Well,
this is for their own freedoms, because we live in a free country. Now, what is unresolved here is, what do you do with sports? It's unresolved. And I've followed that closely, and I don't see any meaningful solutions to come down off of that. We know that hormones manifest differently in different people, and there's the whole thing with steroids. Steroids are hormones, right? And we rallied against steroids in professional sports because it gives you an undue advantage. So, I've tried to think of what the future of sports would be in the world of a gender spectrum. And it may be, you don't specify whether it's a male or female sport. You just take measurements of what your hormonal balances are. And so you compete based on your hormones. I mean, this is thought I had. I mean, I don't know. I don't know where it's going to land.
The WNBA won't be in business for very long if that's the case.
It would just be, you'd have to find some way to compete people against each other if you still care that sports is an interesting activity.
I guess the area where it does come up in a non-sports area.
Yeah, tell me, I don't know.
So it would be, you talk in your book about the education of children and teaching children about science. And right now, children are being taught about the quote-unquote gender spectrum, which is not scientifically based. That is a theory-based idea.
No, wait, hold on. People express themselves on a spectrum. So you learn that.
That's a social point, not a scientific point. Meaning we express ourselves
hold on.
Based in different languages. Is that something you teach in science class, or is that something that you teach when you're teaching language?
So whether the fact that people want to express themselves on a spectrum, on a gender spectrum, whether that fact is something you want to put in a sociology class or in a science class, maybe that remains to be determined. But it is a real fact about real society.
Well, of course, nobody's denying that people identify how they want to identify.
So
the question is, what is the relationship of that to biology? Meaning that the argument is made that trans women are women, for example. And what that seems to mean is that trans women are identical to women. Now, if people want to say trans women are not biological women, obviously that is the case. But people don't seem to want to say that, although that is obviously scientifically true. Trans women are not biological women. Biological women are biological women.
But where are you going with this? What are you trying to accomplish by asking yourself, is it science or is it not science? It's people in society.
But this is a perfect example of an area where suddenly it doesn't matter to say things that are just true. Like, why is it bad or wrong to point out?
I have another way to approach this. I care what is objectively true in the world. as a scientist. But let me not say even as a scientist. I just simply care what is objectively true. And science happens to be a pretty potent path to invoke, to find out what is true. And so if people express themselves on a gender spectrum, and that is an actual thing in an actual society, if we have not fully explained that scientifically, that's an interesting frontier to study. If you want to say it's only sociological, then it's the purview of the social sciences. I don't care who studies it. It's an interesting fact about society that's worth learning about. To fight someone and say, it's not biological, it's just your this, it's real and it's there.
Well,
because it's real because it manifests.
But it is real because it manifests, but the question of how to classify manifestation is a scientific question, meaning that, for example, there was a woman over at Brown University. She came out with a study that suggested that there was a phenomenon called rapid onset gender dysphoria, in which a member of a particular group would suffer from gender dysphoria, and this person's immediate peer group would suddenly have an onset of gender dysphoria. This paper was so controversial that Brown tried to pull it, and then was forced to reassign it later. You see this sort of treatment.
That's a different question. What you're asking now is, are there some topics that should not be studied scientifically?
Right.
And is there some taboo? And Sam Harris speaks a lot about this.
Yes.
And I think the concern is, if you study some topic that's a hot button topic and you bring scientific methods and tools to it, we don't trust, I'm interpreting here, I think we as a society don't trust that people in charge in a free country won't try to legislate something that will constrict people's freedoms in the face of that information. I think that's the fear.
Well, isn't that...
It's a fear.
I mean, and isn't that...
We don't trust our own ability to govern ourselves in the face of what could be some information relative to other kinds of information.
Isn't that a bit of a problem?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's not. It means it's not a free society. It's not a society of free inquiry, which I think you need ultimately. But yeah.
My general take on all of this stuff, from climate change to gender dysphoria to all of these issues, is bring out the science and then let's hash it out. I think that the problem I'm seeing on a lot of sides
is, what is your motivation?
Why? Right? Why does that matter?
It matters because if you have political power, you could end up creating legislation that subtracts freedoms from people who previously were enjoying the same freedoms as you. The history of that exercise
then make a better argument.
Doesn't end well.
Well, but the history of which exercise? Bring out all the science and let's hash it out?
I'm saying if you bring out all the science and the politicians hash it out, the history of that exercise is a recipe for disaster if it involves discoveries that put people's freedom as defined in our Constitution at risk.
But now you're arguing for limitations on areas of particular study.
No, I'm arguing on we need a way to we need a way to protect people's freedoms in the face of whatever gets discovered scientifically.
So I
agree.
I think that's what the Constitution is for, is to guard rights from.
But we're always fighting people who want rights are always fighting others who are saying they don't get the rights from the Constitution. This is a daily challenge on the progressive left. It is a daily challenge, right? Here's an example. I forgot how I ended up getting this phone call. It was some magazine that serves the gay community. And I remember why, because they wanted my opinion on, they wanted my opinion about whether being gay was biological or mental.
Right, there's that new study that came out, this vast study.
Or psychological.
Right,
okay?
Right.
And I said, I don't care which it is. Find out what it is, fine. But the answer to that question should have no consequence on legislations or laws. Because, for example, suppose it said it's purely biological, okay? Then you say, oh, that explains it. Suppose it says it's purely psychological. what are you going to do now? You say, well, now you're going to go to the reorientation camps or whatever those are called, where they realign you because they say it's psychological rather than biological. All of a sudden, people start behaving in ways in society that want to constrict the freedom of expression of who and what people are. And that is a danger. So maybe there needs to be a line in the sand. Let science do what it does, but politicians keep us free. Yet there's so many politicians that are doing the opposite of that.
So why aren't you a libertarian? I mean, like, I'm a libertarian. Come over here. Just okay. The line is right here. Just join me over here.
You know, conservatives care so deeply about science. This time, the topic was specifically about transgender rights. He refers to it as transgenderism. And I'm guessing he was hoping that Neil deGrasse Tyson would go along with whatever narrative he was trying to push. And we know that Shapiro has not been so kind to the transgender community, so you can imagine what kind of narrative he's trying to push. But what I appreciated was how Neil deGrasse Tyson responded to Shapiro's statement in this video. Take a look.
The argument is made that trans women are women, for example. And what that seems to mean is that trans women are identical to women. Now, if people want to say trans women are not biological women, obviously that is the case. But people don't seem to want to say that, although that is obviously scientifically true. Trans women are not biological women. Biological women are biological women.
But where are you going with this? What are you trying to accomplish by asking yourself, is it science or is it not science? It's people in society.
But this is a perfect example of an area where suddenly it doesn't matter to say things that are just true. Like why is it bad or wrong to point out?
I have another way to approach this. I care what is objectively true in the world as a scientist. But let me not say even as a scientist. I just simply care what is objectively true. And science happens to be a pretty potent path to invoke, to find out what is true. And so if people express themselves on a gender spectrum, and that is an actual thing in an actual society, if we have not fully explained that scientifically, that's an interesting frontier to study. If you want to say it's only sociological, then it's the purview of the social sciences. I don't care who studies it. It's an interesting fact about society that's worth learning about. To fight someone and say it's not biological, it's just your this. It's real and it's there.
We've got some more clips from this interview, but Francesca, I want to go to you first. How did Neil deGrasse Tyson handle that? Were you in favor of it? Could he have been a little stronger? And look, for me personally, I love the first reaction to Ben Shapiro's statement because it was like, where are you trying to go with this? Like, what is your intention here? Because that's really key in understanding the motivation behind the framing and the line of questioning in this interview.
Yeah. I love when he just like folds his hand and is like, his mind is just going to outer space, like, find the peace, Neil. Like you're hearing a lot of shrill nonsense, and he just like folds his hands and goes there, and then comes back with, you're right, an incredibly, very smart retort, which is why? Mm-hmm. Why are you obsessed with this? And that's the same thing with anti-trans extremists all the time is, what's your point? Let's say you're correct, right? So what? Mm-hmm. right? And the answer is, well, I don't know. I just I want to keep people from living their truth. I want to keep people from accessing the same services. I want to keep people from healthcare. I want to make sure that there's more hate crimes against them. I want to send them to camps so they can re-educate themselves about what gender they really are and what is the next level here, because that's what it feels like. And if you're so obsessed with it, do you have something to tell us? Do you also have feelings like you're in the wrong body? Like what?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's similar to the mentality against same-sex marriage, right? I think that there's an element to this where I don't think elements of the right wing take the transgender community seriously, in that they seem to think that it's some sort of lifestyle choice, right? And it's so odd. That's why they're so focused on the biological arguments, right? But biologically, it's a woman, it's a man, not a woman. Biologically this, biologically. They're trying to hone in on, in their minds, this perverse way of living and a perverse lifestyle choice that people are making, when in reality, that's obviously not the case. Who the hell makes a decision that basically makes them vulnerable to the worst forms of hatred, brutality, violence, discrimination? And also, yeah, why do you care? If your whole ideology, and look, I think Ben Shapiro is actually different from other right-wing media figures in that I don't think that for him, this is just a culture war to deflect from economic issues. Ben Shapiro was writing anti-pornography books way before he was a known figure, right? These are issues that he deeply cares about. But the question is
the most backed up. I mean, I swear, if there's anyone who's more backed up than Ben Shapiro, I'd like to see him. I'm sorry. Well, his whole thing is
I don't know. I mean, he's got a wife, he's got kids. I've heard that the Proud Boys don't allow themselves to masturbate. I would argue maybe they're a little more backed up. But no, Ben Shapiro does seem to have some issues. The fact that he lost it over a Cardi B song and the idea of women getting aroused really offended him. There's something up. And I would just argue that if the majority of your ideological beliefs revolve around denying others their rights because you disagree with their lifestyle choices, which have no bearing on your life, you gotta really rethink what your priorities are. You really do. There's something wrong with you if your political identity is about snatching rights away or denying rights to people who just have lives that are different from yours or identities that are different from yours. That's who Ben Shapiro is. I mean, I keep track of his podcast. I'm curious, what is he talking about today? And the majority of his content is, I don't like the way you're living. I don't like what you're rapping. He's like the woman from our HOA who's constantly snooping in on us and trying to figure out whether or not we're doing anything right or wrong. Just get out of our lives. Get out of our lives.
And it's also, it is exactly, Ben Shapiro is someone who trots out the Holocaust all the time. He talks about, which is fine, right? But he weaponizes it against people like Ilhan Omar and calls them anti-Semitic whenever they criticize Israel, right? But looking at his ideology, whose ideology is more in line with Nazism, right? People who say that everyone should live their truth and live the identity that they feel like they want to live and love who they want to love, or the person who's nah, there's a right way and a wrong way, there's a pure gender and a not pure gender. That sounds like some Nazi crap, all right? So again, and the last thing I'll say is, I said this before on the show, and if you are obsessed with men, so-called men, going into so-called women's bathrooms or dressing up as women or pretending to be a woman in order to get a gold medal in an Olympic sport, because that just happens, when you transition, suddenly you're really good at sports. That's because your little twisted, perverted brain, it would do that. Not because anyone else is a pervert, it's because you're a pervert. Because it would only occur to you, perverted cisgender dude, to be like, well, I could just go up in the women's restroom and then I touch all the boobies. No, man, No trans person thinks that. You think that. Because it's the same thing where this is so stupid. You know, whenever like men are like, oh yeah, if I had boobs, I'd like touch them all the time. Like, hey, as a woman, do you like touch your own boobs? Like, no, we don't. We don't actually.
Kind of.
Oh,
not on the show.
And no judgments if we do. But you know what I'm saying? Like, it's the same. It's just dumb cis gross logic.
Yeah, I totally agree. Look, I can't help myself. One more video. Let's go to the next one.
Okay,
this is earlier in their conversation. Let's watch.
The argument that is typically made by gender theorists is that gender is entirely separate from sex. You've seen the argument made that it makes no difference on average if men are stronger than women are, and that if we were to allow transgender women to compete with non-transgender women, then this would somehow not disadvantage biological women. And this seems to me absolutely ascientific, that if we're actually gonna have a discussion about gender and sex, that should be based in data, which suggests that mammals are in fact binary in terms of their sex, unless you have intersex birth defects typically, or genetic defects.
I'm happy to opine on this. This only matters because today we segregate nearly all sports by gender. Otherwise, why do you even give a shit what someone identifies with? We live in a free country, and with consenting adults and people's free expression of who and what they are.
Man, on adult level, I agree with you. I think it does matter what you teach your children.
That's what I'm saying. And so there's the matrix of what you are biologically, how you express yourself, who you choose as a sexual partner. If we actually live in a free country, as we tell ourselves, people's freedom to behave in any of those ways should not concern you at all. Nor are they requiring that you behave that way. Okay, this is for their own freedoms, because we live in a free country.
Look, I love that he uses the rhetoric that's typically championed by conservatives, regarding freedom, and we live in a free country, and no one's forcing you to do this. I think that it's effective, and if you watch the full conversation, Shapiro kind of struggles to respond to it.
It's so big of Shapiro. I'm sorry, but just hats off to little Ben Shapiro for having someone who actually believes that the Earth rotates around the sun instead of the other way around, as many of my viewers probably believe, and that I know, and I know this might trigger some of the flat earthers out there, and I mean no offense to them, but is it great? Like, I love that he's got an astronomer on. That's just. And of course he's gonna lose. He just lost, destroyed. Neil deGrasse Tyson destroys Ben Shapiro in that, and again. Women's sports, look, women's sports, I will take you seriously on women's sports, right wingers, the day that you put women's sports on television. That's it. The day that you put it on television, I'll believe that you care at all. The day that you're like, oh, we've never won a World Cup. We've won like 4 with the women's national team. Start caring about women's sports first, and then we'll talk about trans people.
Yeah, by the way, one of our members wrote in and said, it's pretty rich of Shapiro to ask like an astrophysicist about like issues pertaining to like genetics and gender and all of that. But I was under the impression that all scientists are the same. All scientists study the same science, don't they? I mean, don't all scientists also look into why it is that women would feel any type of arousal during sex, which I've failed to provide my own wife, and that's why Cardi B literally triggers me, and I'll do an embarrassing segment on it. Anyway, that's who Ben Shapiro is. By the way, pay attention, he doesn't even blink when he's asking these insane questions. But I'm glad he had the conversation, because I enjoyed having the discussion on our show, and maybe he should have more scientists on. More scientists, less cranks. I think that it would do a world of difference for Ben Shapiro's show, and maybe even Ben Shapiro's ideology. We'll see.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.